It started with sirens. Not the kind you hear during rush hour in downtown LA, but the piercing wails that don't belong in gated communities. They tore through the quiet streets of Palm Hills just before 4 a.m., bouncing off walls of stucco mansions and well-kept palm trees, disturbing what should have been an ordinary spring night. By the time the first fire engine arrived at 207 Cypress Circle, the upper floor of the sprawling Mediterranean-style estate was already engulfed in flames. Orange heat pulsed through the villa's arched windows, lighting up the courtyard fountain like a bonfire offering. Emergency lights painted the circular driveway in red and blue. Neighbors, still in their robes, gathered at the edge of the sidewalk, silent, confused, and waiting for answers. This wasn't just any home. This was the residence of Martin and Grace Whitmore, one of the most well-known couples in Palm Springs high society. But that night, nothing about the Whitmore home felt like luxury. Firefighters worked fast, breaking windows, tearing down doors, searching for survivors. Inside the blackened shell of a second-story guest room, they found a young woman, burned, unconscious, but breathing. Just down the hall, near the remains of what used to be a walk-in closet, they found a man, unrecognizable at first. His body collapsed near the door, as if he'd been trying to reach someone. On the ground floor, paramedics located a third person. A woman in her mid-40s, with minor burns, sitting motionless in the foyer. Her silk nightgown was scorched at the hem. Her face, blank. She didn't ask for help. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the marble floor as if she hadn't yet decided whether she wanted to speak or scream. Her name was Grace Whitmore. By 7 a.m., the headlines were already live. Palm Springs fire, so and nanny dead, wife survives. Murder-suicide? Investigators question fire in Whitmore estate. Beneath the palm trees, dark secrets of California's elite? The press descended like a second wave of heat. But even before official statements were released, the rumors took shape. Because the Palm Hills community wasn't just upscale. It was curated, controlled. Houses here came with climate-controlled wine cellars, weekly landscaping, and unspoken rules about appearances. And if you were someone like Grace Whitmore, the perfect hostess, the former Ivy Leaguer, the charitable socialite, appearances were everything. Investigators had questions. So did everyone else. Why had Martin Whitmore, CEO of one of California's largest private construction firms, been found outside the room of their young Filipina housemaid, instead of his own master bedroom? Why had she, Isabel Cruz, 23 years old, been sleeping upstairs in a guest room instead of the servants' quarters? And why was Grace, the only one to walk out without life-threatening injuries, the one who made no effort to explain what happened? The official fire report cited accelerants. Gasoline, likely poured through an overhead ventilation system. There was no sign of electrical malfunction. No candle. No cooking accident. Not a fire. Arson. The scene told a story before any of the survivors did. A story about betrayal, rage, and something darker, something premeditated. What no one knew, what Grace never said at the scene, was that the fire had started long before that night. It began months earlier, in whispers, in careful silences, in subtle changes she couldn't quite name at first. The way her husband stopped calling to say he'd be late. The way the maid began wearing looser clothing and excusing herself during morning prep with an urgency Grace hadn't seen before. Small things. A missed call here. A quiet tension at dinner. But when you've spent 2 decades building a life from the outside in, you develop an eye for cracks in the glass. Grace Whitmore wasn't the kind of woman who panicked. She was the kind who noticed. And when she noticed something, she documented it. She cataloged it. She followed the thread until it burned in her hands. She'd come from money. Old Boston bloodline. Educated, well-spoken, and raised with one rule above all. Control the narrative, or someone else will. When she married Martin in '99, he was still on the rise. A gifted builder with a hard-earned charm, the kind who shook hands with everyone and remembered names. He made money fast, and Grace made sure they spent it correctly. Homes in New York and Palm Springs. A beach condo in La Jolla. 2 Range Rovers. 1 black. 1 pearl white. But no children. They tried. IVF, specialists, months of hormonal waves and private shame. Nothing worked. Eventually, they stopped talking about it, and Grace poured her energy into organizing charity balls, museum galas, fundraising for medical scholarships, all while running the home like a luxury brand manager. So when Martin suggested hiring someone to help around the house full-time, she didn't argue. And when Isabel Cruz arrived, polite, soft-spoken, and barely 23, Grace didn't question her much. Isabel had credentials: nursing school in Manila, a sister in Chicago, a dream to open a small clinic back home. She also had no legal leverage, no green card, no passport in hand, just a sponsor letter signed by Martin and a tidy room above the garage. She was invisible until she wasn't. The first thing Grace noticed was the coffee. Isabel used to love the aroma, always brewed it strong, said it reminded her of home. But suddenly she was avoiding it. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, the hand on her stomach when she thought no one was watching. Grace told herself it was nothing, a stomach bug, an overreaction. But then Martin started offering to drive Isabel to her appointments. Not her, not the assistant. That's when Grace started writing things down. The fire investigators would later call Grace's journal obsessive. They weren't wrong. It had dates, phone numbers from call logs, expenses for clinics she didn't recognize, withdrawals in cash, jewelry she never received, a printed photo of a positive pregnancy test she found hidden beneath folded linens. She had everything except the truth from either of them. And so, on the night of April 15th, after dinner was served, and Martin retreated to his study, and Isabel climbed the stairs to her room above the guest wing, Grace waited. She waited for silence. Waited for her husband's muffled voice through the vents, whispering promises to a woman 20 years younger, in a house Grace had designed, under lights she had installed, on furniture she had picked out. And by the time those whispers faded into sleep, Grace Whitmore was already changing clothes. It was 2:47 a.m. when she moved. Not with panic, not with rage, but with the steady, practiced precision of a woman who had spent her life hiding what hurt her. She opened the garage, lifted the 5-liter gas canister meant for the backup generator, walked barefoot up the narrow staircase, past the family portraits, through the wing meant for guests, and stood outside Isabel's door. The fire started fast. But the betrayal? It had been smoldering for a long, long time. They say a fire reveals what the surface tried to hide. That it doesn't just consume walls and ceilings, but illusions, pretenses, and sometimes marriages. When firefighters carried Grace Whitmore out of her own home that April morning, she didn't scream. She didn't ask where her husband was. She didn't mention the housemaid who, at that moment, was clinging to life upstairs. She simply stared ahead, her face lit by a blaze that wasn't just flames, but something deeper, something personal. But what makes a woman become silent while her world burns? To answer that, you have to go back. Not to the night of the fire, but to the weeks before it when everything started to shift. It began with a dress. Grace had returned early from a fundraiser in Rancho Mirage. It had ended sooner than expected. A few guests left sick from undercooked scallops. She didn't tell Martin she was coming back. The house was dim, quiet, not unusual for a Thursday night. But as she walked through the hallway that connected the garage to the kitchen, she noticed something odd. On the laundry counter sat a traditional Filipino maternity dress, soft, floral, loose-fitting. The kind you don't find at boutiques in Palm Springs. Grace stared at it for a moment, then folded it neatly. No questions asked. Not yet. The next clue was in the silence. Martin had always been a talker. Stories from the site, gripes about subcontractors, the latest gossip from the Rotary Club. But over the last 2 months, he'd grown distant. He stopped staying up to watch the news with her, avoided eye contact at dinner, and started giving short, non-committal answers when she asked about his day. At first, she thought it was stress. His company had recently lost a bid on a downtown development project. She told herself it would pass, that it always did, until she saw his phone. Grace never believed in snooping. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't her. But when Martin left his phone charging on the side table and stepped into the shower, something in her hand moved before her brain could stop it. A reflex born of weeks of unease. There was a recent call log to a number she didn't recognize, not once or twice, but daily. Always between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., when Martin was supposedly at meetings. The messages were short, infrequent, and had been deleted almost immediately. All but one. She threw up again this morning. Should I call someone? Grace didn't sleep that night. The confrontation didn't come right away. She wasn't impulsive. She didn't throw things or raise her voice. Instead, she began cataloging everything. Receipts, dates, and behaviors. She watched Isabel more closely. The girl had grown quiet, withdrawn. She moved slower, sat more. There was a tenderness in the way she touched her own stomach when she thought no one was looking. Grace recognized that touch. She had practiced it herself during years of failed IVF treatments. The kind of touch that says, maybe this time, something will grow inside me that stays. And now, that something belonged to her husband, not her. One afternoon, Grace tested a theory. She asked Isabel to help rearrange the guest bedroom closet. Nothing urgent, just dusting and refolding linens. While Isabel worked inside, Grace checked the maid's small quarters upstairs. She didn't have to look long. Behind a stack of folded pillowcases in a plastic storage box was a pregnancy test box, empty. Underneath it, a small printed ultrasound image. Just a blur of shadow and measurement. 12 weeks. The label said. Grace stared at it, fingers trembling, then placed it back exactly where she found it. Closed the lid. Smoothed the cover. That night, Martin said he had a late dinner with a developer. He didn't know Grace had already checked his calendar and found no such meeting listed. The next day, Grace called the clinic. She didn't give her name. Just asked to confirm if an Isabel Cruz had any prenatal visits on record. The receptionist hesitated, citing privacy policy. Grace hung up before pressing further. She didn't need verbal confirmation. She already had enough. Enough to start seeing the truth not as theory, but as fact. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He was planning a new family. In the same house they'd built together. While Grace still clung to hormone shots and frozen embryos, he was planting something real inside someone else. It was a Tuesday evening when everything unraveled. The household staff had already left. The garden was dark. The only sound was the hum of the built-in refrigerator. Isabel was preparing dinner, chopping herbs on the marble island, her back turned. Grace walked in silent. "We need to talk," she said. Controlled. Isabel froze. Then turned slowly. There was no confusion in her face. Only fear. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly. Grace gestured toward the small table near the window. They sat opposite each other, employer and employee, wife and mistress, both knowing what this conversation would mean. Grace didn't waste time. "The test in your drawer. When were you going to tell me?" Isabel opened her mouth. Closed it. "It wasn't mine," she whispered. "It was for a friend." Grace didn't move. "I have phone logs. Appointments. His car's GPS history. You want to try again?" Silence. Then Isabel broke. The confession didn't come in one dramatic explosion. It trickled out piece by piece. A cracked dam. She spoke in fragments, English woven with soft Tagalog. "He said he loved me. He said he wanted to start fresh. He said you would understand." Grace clenched her hands under the table, her face unreadable. "When did it start?" she asked. "In December," Isabel replied. "When you were away. For the fertility clinic." The irony cut deeper than any betrayal. While Grace was injecting herself with hormones in a sterile LA hotel room, Martin had been building a life with someone she paid to scrub their floors. Isabel begged, apologized, said she never wanted it to happen this way, that she didn't mean to fall in love, that it had all started with kindness, not seduction, that she was alone, dependent, and Grace believed her. But belief is not the same as forgiveness, because Isabel hadn't just carried a child. She had carried the one thing Grace had never been able to give Martin, a future. That night, Grace sat alone in her study. The house was dark, but she didn't turn on the lights. She stared at the wedding photo on the bookshelf. Martin in his tux. Grace in a pale gold gown. Smiling. A life built on granite and marble and design catalogs. Now, reduced to gasoline and rage. She didn't know how long she sat there. But when she finally stood, one thought looped in her mind like a quiet prayer. If I can't have the life we built, then neither will he. It wasn't rage that moved Grace Whitmore. Not at first. Rage is hot, but sloppy. What she felt was quiet, focused, calculated. It burned slow and steady, like a fuse waiting for the match. After that conversation in the kitchen, everything fell into place. The lies she'd once doubted were now facts. The story she'd once feared became clear. Her husband had betrayed her, not just physically, not just emotionally, but at the core of her identity. While Grace tried to create a family through medicine and sacrifice, Martin created one through impulse and deceit. She didn't tell anyone. Not her sister in Seattle. Not her college friend in Boston. Not even her therapist. Instead, she watched, listened, noticed. For the next 5 days, she said nothing. She smiled at Martin at dinner, responded politely to Isabel's soft greetings. She played her role like she always had. But every hour, she rehearsed. There were things to prepare. The guest wing upstairs had its own ventilation system, separate from the main central air, designed that way to give privacy to long-term visitors. Grace had insisted on it when they renovated 3 years ago. Martin hadn't cared about the HVAC layout, but she did. She also knew where the gas was kept, a 5-liter container in the garage used to fuel their standby generator. Rarely touched, almost never checked. She knew how to move through the house without triggering security alerts. Knew which floorboards creaked, which hinges needed oil. She had designed this home from blueprint to backsplash. This wasn't revenge in the moment. It was revenge from within. Designed like a room, built like a house. Friday, April 12th, she began her dry run. At 1:17 a.m., she walked the route barefoot. From her bedroom to the garage. From the garage to the second floor. Past the guest linen closet. Past the staircase. She timed her steps. 48 seconds. She tested the weight of the gas container. Just over 11 pounds when full. She practiced pouring, not real fuel, just water. Into a sink. Into a vent. She studied how it flowed. How it sprayed. How it splashed. She Googled vapor pressure. Smoke inhalation. Accelerant behavior. She cleared her browser history after every search. Grace wasn't emotional. She was meticulous. By Sunday night, she had made peace with it. Not with what she was going to do, but with the idea that no other choice remained. She had been replaced. Disrespected. Erased. The home, the marriage, the life she curated, none of it belonged to her anymore. So she would take it all down with her. And if fire was the language Martin had chosen, fire would be her answer. The night of the fire, April 15th, was quiet. Too quiet. Dinner was roast chicken, grilled artichokes, and white wine. Isabel prepared it. Martin complimented the seasoning. Grace smiled. She wore a navy dress and pearl earrings. She asked Martin about his project in Indio. He said it was ahead of schedule. They cleared their own plates that night. At 9:47 p.m., Grace slipped into her study. She turned on the jazz radio station she hadn't listened to in years. Billie Holiday drifted softly through the built-in speakers. Her wedding photo sat on the bookshelf. Martin passed by once, poked his head in. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just thinking." He smiled gently, not seeing the fire in her eyes. "Don't stay up too late." She didn't reply. At 10:30 p.m., Martin retreated to his office. The door clicked. The lock slid into place. Grace knew his pattern. Open his laptop, pour a finger of whiskey, glance at emails, fall asleep on the sofa. She waited another 90 minutes. At 12:03 a.m., she changed. She took off her dress and put on dark cotton pants and a sweatshirt, nondescript, silent. She tied back her hair. No jewelry. At 12:17 a.m., she walked to the garage. The gas can was there. Heavier than she remembered. She carried it with both hands, steady. At 12:33 a.m., she stood in front of Isabel's room. The hallway was still. The lights were dimmed, the way Isabel always left them. A soft glow spilled from the bottom of the door. She was still awake. Maybe reading. Maybe texting Martin. Grace waited. At 1:06 a.m., the light turned off. She placed a chair under the door handle. Not to trap, just to delay. Then she turned toward the wall vent just above the baseboard. She removed the front grille with a flathead screwdriver. Poured slowly, methodically. Not too much in one place. She moved across the hallway, letting the liquid trace a thin, invisible path along the floor's edge. Then down the stairs. Then into the duct opening connected to the ceiling above the kitchen, where the ventilation lines fed into the guest wing. She left nothing soaked, only primed. At 2:41 a.m., she returned to the garage and put the gas can back exactly where it had been. She washed her hands, changed clothes again, brushed her teeth, and waited. 2:58 a.m. She retrieved a single match from the drawer near the oven. She didn't use a lighter. That would be crude, predictable. The match flared bright, white-yellow. She stared at it for half a second, then dropped it into the open duct. The fire took 4 seconds to catch, 12 seconds to reach the insulation. By 3:01 a.m., the fire alarms blared. By 3:02, smoke had filled the hallway. By 3:04, Martin woke up, coughing, confused. By 3:05, he tried to reach Isabel's door, screaming her name, finding it jammed. By 3:07, Grace walked down the main staircase, hands trembling, eyes wide. She opened the front door, sat in the foyer, waited. The first responders arrived at 3:13 a.m. She watched them break in, watched them run, watched the sky turn orange with smoke. But she never said a word, because by then her decision was complete. This wasn't about justice. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about control. For the first time in years, she had taken something back, and the world would burn to know it. There's a moment in every fire investigation when the heat dies. But the questions begin to burn. By 5:17 a.m. on April 16th, the last embers had been extinguished at 207 Cypress Circle. The fire trucks remained. The crews packed up. But the scene wasn't quiet, not anymore. Because this wasn't just a fire. 2 people had been pulled from the smoke. Martin Whitmore, pronounced dead on scene. Isabel Cruz, barely alive, airlifted to the burn unit in Coachella County Hospital. And Grace Whitmore? She sat wrapped in a blanket, hands unstained, eyes wide but dry. Alive. Composed. Not asking for anyone. Detective Marlon Tate of the Palm Springs Fire Arson Task Unit arrived at 6:22 a.m. He'd seen mansions burn before. But this one didn't smell like accident. It smelled like preparation. He began with the structure. Most residential fires, especially in modern construction, start in the kitchen. Faulty wiring. Gas stove. But this one hadn't. The point of origin was clear. The guest wing, second floor, in a compact side room not connected to any appliances. The fire had burned vertically, fast. The roof above the room had collapsed first. Then the hallway beam. Then the decorative plaster ceiling just outside the guest suite. The burn patterns were distinct. Too even. Like someone had fed the fire its path. Next came the odors. To most, fire smells like smoke. To an arson investigator, each material tells its own story. Detective Tate picked up petroleum notes immediately. Gasoline. Not in puddles, but soaked into the wood grain itself, then ignited from above. And then just outside the vent, he found it, a faint trail. Char residue that didn't match the surrounding wood. A small soot arc along the metal edge, a classic pour and ignite signature. Whoever lit this fire hadn't just wanted to destroy a room. They wanted to control what burned and what didn't. Meanwhile, inside the hospital burn unit, Isabel Cruz was dying. Her body had absorbed over 60% surface area burns. Her lungs, scorched by heated air, struggled to deliver oxygen. Doctors intubated her within the first hour. She never regained consciousness. Grace visited once. Stayed 10 minutes. Didn't speak. By April 23rd, Isabel was dead. The death of an undocumented domestic worker inside a billionaire's home doesn't usually make national headlines. But this one? This one hit CNN by nightfall. Not because of who she was, but because of who they all were. The press now had a trifecta of infidelity, fire. Detective Tate's focus narrowed the same day Isabel died. He reviewed footage from the mansion's exterior cameras. At 2:47 a.m., a figure in dark clothing exited the garage, carrying a large plastic container. No sound, no panic, just quiet movement. 36 minutes later, the same figure, Grace Whitmore, returned. The camera caught her face for only a second. She didn't look scared. She looked finished. Forensic analysis confirmed gasoline traces in 4 key places. The hallway vent just outside Isabel's room. The base of the guest room door. The secondary duct grate above the kitchen ceiling. And on the inside lining of the stairwell molding. Too precise for coincidence. Too targeted for mistake. The chemical signature matched the Chevron premium brand stocked in the Whitmore garage. Grace, of course, had an explanation. Or tried to. She told investigators she had awoken to a burning smell. She tried to check on Isabel, but the smoke had been overwhelming. Martin, she claimed, had still been in his office. She assumed he was the one who tried to rescue the maid. She didn't mention the match. She didn't mention the fuel. But when pressed, she couldn't account for the 40-minute gap between her movements. She said she'd been checking locks. It fell apart slowly, not through a single confession, but through 1,000 small contradictions. Her phone history, once wiped, was retrieved. Searches included: how fast does gasoline burn in closed spaces? Can you die from smoke before flames? How to lock an interior door from outside? She had deleted her browser cache, but not her sync folder. The data lived on a backup server. The driver, the part-time chef, and the gardener were all interviewed. None of them saw anything. But all 3 admitted something had changed in the house the past few months. The chef recalled Grace once asking what medications Isabel kept in the upstairs cabinet. The gardener admitted he'd overheard a heated conversation between Martin and Grace a week before the fire, something about being humiliated. The driver, silent at first, eventually shared that Martin had begun dropping Isabel off at clinics in Palm Desert. Always alone. Always cash payments. Grace knew about them. She had seen the receipts. But she said nothing, not until after the fire. And then there was the match. A single charred wooden matchstick found inside the air duct shaft. No one in the household smoked. No fireplace had been lit in over a month. But this match, this sliver of wood, was the trigger. Not a lighter. Not faulty wiring. A choice. Deliberate. Ancient. Personal. Detective Tate brought in a forensic psychologist. The profile was blunt. This wasn't sudden. This was surgical. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. She didn't lash out. She restructured the house to match her new reality. When the report was submitted to the DA's office, the headline was simple: homicide by arson. 2 counts. Premeditated. They arrested Grace Whitmore on May 2, 2013. No struggle. No denial. She simply asked, "Can I bring my earrings?" and walked out of the mansion she had once designed, now gutted by flame. May 10, 2013. The Riverside County Courthouse was packed. The media had called it the Housewife Inferno trial. Cable news rolled out their finest anchors. Courtroom sketch artists scribbled furiously. Security doubled. Not because the defendant was dangerous, but because her silence was. Grace Whitmore, wife of a deceased billionaire, survivor of a deadly mansion fire, entered the courtroom in a dark navy suit, hair pulled back tight, face free of makeup. No tears. No smiles. No dramatics. The cameras weren't allowed inside. But the world watched anyway. The people of the state of California versus Grace Elise Whitmore. 2 counts of first-degree murder. 1 count of arson resulting in death. 1 count of premeditated destruction of property. Bail was denied. Her attorneys, a trio of well-paid defense strategists from San Francisco, pled not guilty by reason of temporary mental incapacity. They described a woman under immense pressure, years of infertility, a cold, unfaithful husband, a young, pregnant housemaid living in her home, and a final confrontation that shattered her sense of self. They argued the act was not murder, but a psychotic break, a moment of unraveling. But the prosecution came armed. Naomi Shepard, sharp, unshakable, unrelenting, laid it out like a map made of gasoline and paper. She didn't snap. She didn't scream. She planned. She researched. She rehearsed. And when she was ready, she watched them burn. The jury sat frozen. The evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage from the garage, Grace's internet history, the burned matchstick, the gasoline residue, her GPS data, the precise, deliberate pouring pattern of accelerant through the duct system. Even more damning? Her silence. Grace never once called 911, never shouted for help. She didn't even try to open Isabel's door. When firefighters arrived, she was found sitting in the foyer, unharmed, waiting. On the 6th day of the trial, Isabel's family flew in from the Philippines. They sat in the front row, quiet, dressed in black. Her mother, a small woman with a wrinkled face and trembling hands, held a framed photo of Isabel in a nurse's uniform. Smiling, hopeful, 23 years old. It was the only time Grace looked away from the bench. That same day, Grace took the stand. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, measured, almost mechanical. She didn't deny the affair. She didn't deny the pregnancy. She didn't deny the match. She said only this: I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to watch her die. The way I watched my future disappear. There was no crying in the room. Not from her. Not from Isabel's family. Not even from the press. Just silence. Heavy. Irreversible. Psychiatrists debated her condition. Dr. Alan Reeves, for the defense, testified that Grace had suffered a dissociative episode triggered by long-term emotional trauma, hormonal therapy, and psychological collapse from betrayal. She wasn't herself, he said. She was watching herself do something she didn't understand. But the prosecution brought in Dr. Marla Kent, a forensic psychologist who'd worked on over 200 arson-related homicides. Her opinion was cold and clinical. This wasn't psychosis. This was ownership. She didn't want to leave him. She wanted to destroy the version of him that lived beyond her. When closing arguments began, the courtroom was breathless. The prosecution reminded the jury. She didn't kill them in a rage. She planned their death like she planned her wedding, her dinners, her furniture. And then she sat down, crossed her legs, and listened to them die upstairs. The defense argued that she had been broken. A woman discarded, dehumanized, and mentally fragile. She needed help, not a cage. But jurors didn't see fragility. They saw control. They saw design. They saw the blueprint of vengeance. The verdict came on June 21, 2013. Grace sat straight. No visible emotion. Guilty. On all counts. Sentencing followed in July. 20 years to life, with eligibility for parole after 15. Court-mandated psychiatric treatment for no less than 5 years. Restitution to Isabel's family, $1.2 million. The courtroom emptied slowly. News vans swarmed. Commentators speculated about the case for weeks. But Grace? She said nothing else. Her last recorded words were to the bailiff as she was handcuffed and led from the courtroom. "Awak, please don't pull me." And she did. The Whitmore estate was auctioned. Martin's company dissolved within months. Their Palm Hills mansion, the one that had hosted senators and CEOs, was eventually demolished. The plot remains vacant to this day. In the months following the trial of Grace Whitmore, the country moved on. Another headline. Another scandal. Another mansion reduced to ash. But in Palm Springs, and in communities far beyond it, something had shifted. Not because of how the fire started, but because of who it consumed. Isabel Cruz wasn't supposed to matter. In the world she worked in, silent staircases, polished silver, whispered instructions, her presence was functional. Temporary. Replaceable. She was the help. A line item. a shadow behind frosted glass. But her death and the baby she carried forced the city and the state to look in the mirror. And what it saw was uncomfortable: the invisible backbone. In 2013, California employed nearly 250,000 domestic workers. Nannies, housekeepers, caregivers. Many were immigrants. Many were undocumented. Most were women. And almost none had protection. The Cruz case wasn't the first abuse to happen in silence. But it was the first to burn through the walls of a gated community and into the national conscience. Assemblywoman Rosa Medina, whose district included low-income immigrant households in Riverside County, took up the case as a rallying cry. "If this woman had died in a motel room, no one would have cared," she said. But she died in a mansion. And for once, everyone had to listen. By fall of that year, Assembly Bill 1254, known unofficially as the Isabel Act, was passed in the California state legislature. The bill mandated monthly welfare checks for all full-time live-in domestic employees, required employers to register their staff with the state's Domestic Labor Bureau, introduced legal protections against wrongful confinement and coercion, and granted full whistleblower immunity for undocumented workers reporting abuse. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Isabel's story became a symbol. But symbols are painful for the families left behind. Her mother, Lourdes Cruz, returned to the Philippines after the funeral, unable to afford to stay in the U.S. for the trial. She never saw Grace sentenced. She never stepped foot in the mansion where her daughter died. Instead, she built a small garden in Isabel's memory behind a Catholic chapel in Cebu. And on the concrete wall near the waterspout, someone painted words in soft red letters. Hindi siya nawalan, tinanggal siya. She wasn't lost, she was taken. Back in Palm Springs, the Whitmore name faded. The company Martin had spent 18 years building was sold in pieces. Clients walked. Bankers hesitated. Investors evaporated. The estate at 207 Cypress Circle remained untouched for 3 years. Neighbors passed it quietly. Landscapers were paid to keep the lawn alive. But the windows were boarded. The driveway was chained. Eventually, a real estate developer purchased the lot. The home was demolished. The land now hosts an art installation, a mirrored sculpture surrounded by desert plants, titled Unfinished House. It's one of the few exhibits in Palm Springs without a plaque. But everyone knows what stood there. What Grace left behind. Grace herself is serving her sentence at California Institution for Women in Chino. She declined all interview requests. No memoir. No television deal. No televised statement. According to prison staff, she reads a great deal. Works in the library. Speaks very little. Her cellmate told a journalist. She folds her socks like she's still in that big house. Like she's still the lady of it. Parole hearings begin in 2028, but many believe she'll never walk free. Not because of the court's decision, but because she already sentenced herself the moment she struck that match. A city that pretended not to see. Palm Springs has a habit of forgetting the uncomfortable. The case faded from neighborhood brunches. New homes rose. New names joined the country club. The fire became a whisper, something people mention in metaphors, not memories. But every now and then, when someone brings up that address, a silence falls across the table. Because people remember. The wife who sat downstairs. The man who died gasping. The girl who cooked their meals and carried their child. Epilogue. What burns and what remains. The match was real. The fire was real. The betrayal, the silence, the ashes, all real. But the bigger fire? It didn't happen in one house. It happened in the way we see the people who serve us. In the way the powerful lose control. In the way the quiet can become dangerous. Grace Whitmore was many things. Betrayed, broken, elegant, exacting. But in the end, she was a reflection. And when the mirror cracked, we saw ourselves in it too. When a fire burns long enough, it changes not just what it touches, but how we remember what was there. The home at 207 Cypress Circle is gone. The smoke faded. The headlines died. But the story didn't end with the sentencing, or the demolition, or the newspaper obituary. It ended, and began again, with what we chose to do with the truth. The memory of Isabel. She arrived in America with a one-way plane ticket, a suitcase of carefully folded clothes, and a dream she shared in every interview. I want to help people. I want to open a small clinic back home. She never finished nursing school, but in the end she helped far more than she ever imagined. After her death, Isabel Cruz's name became a rallying cry. Not just for immigrant rights or domestic worker protections, but for something harder to define. For dignity, for recognition, for the right to be seen. In Cebu City, Philippines, an old church garden bears her name now. The Isabel Cruz Healing Garden, funded by donations from California nurses' unions, anonymous citizens, and even one quiet contribution from a former Whitmore Holdings shareholder. There's a stone bench beside a bougainvillea tree. A small plaque reads, "She served. She dreamed. She mattered." Local nursing students light candles there before every final exam. Palm Springs moved on. But not everyone did. In the Whitmore social circles, the country clubs, the charity boards, Isabel's name isn't spoken. Grace's story is treated like an open wound they pretend has already scarred over. Some say it was a tragedy. Others say she lost it. Few say we all look the other way. But beneath the surface, there are changes. Wealthy homeowners now ask more questions. Some install third-party oversight for domestic staff. Some choose not to hire at all. Fear did what morality could not. And what about Grace? She remains in the California Institution for Women, more than a decade into her sentence. She no longer speaks to press. She declined parole once already. A prison chaplain once wrote in a blog post, anonymously, that Grace attends grief counseling once a month, but never discusses the fire. In therapy notes later leaked in court filings, one sentence stands out. "I controlled the house. I controlled everything. Until the day I realized I didn't even control my own absence from his future." Some believe she regrets it. Others believe she still justifies it. But the truth, as always, lives in the silences. The baby that never was. No name was ever given. No gender confirmed. Just the term fetal death on a court transcript. But to Isabel's family, it was real. They call the child Asha, meaning hope in Tagalog. Because even if she didn't live, she made the world change, said Isabel's sister. What this case taught us. Not about fire. Not even about love, betrayal, or revenge. But about proximity. About how easily the powerful can look through the people they live with. About how thin the line really is between someone who serves and someone who's forgotten. Isabel wasn't Grace's enemy. She was Grace's mirror, the reflection of everything Grace had tried and failed to be, nurturing, fertile, chosen. And when that reflection became unbearable, she shattered it, the final reflection. No one sets out to burn down their life. But step by step, lie by lie, silence by silence, it becomes combustible. Grace lit the match. But Martin? He poured the fuel long before she ever struck it. And Isabel? She was the only one who didn't build the house. But she paid the highest price for living inside it. Somewhere tonight, someone is wiping down a kitchen counter in a house that doesn't belong to them. Someone is folding towels they can't afford. Someone is smiling politely while carrying a secret they hope doesn't destroy them. Let this story be a reminder. Silence has heat. Silence has oxygen. Silence, left unchecked, burns.